You are listening to KZSC's Voces, Criticas, Critical Voices. I am your producer and host, Silvana Falcon. Today, I am live here in the studio with Professor Norma Klahn, Professor Emeritus of Literature, and Professor Pedro Castillo, Professor Emeritus of History from UC Santa Cruz. Professors Klahn and Castillo are co-founders of the Chicano Latino Research Center and served as the center's co-directors for most of the 1990s. The Chicano Latino Research Center, known here as the CLRC, is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Welcome, Professors Klahn and Castillo, to KCSA's Voces Criticas.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
Professor Klahn, let's start with you. Why don't you take us back a little bit through memory lane? Why did you and Professor Castillo decide to establish the CLRC, and what was the process for establishing a center like that 25 years ago here in the UC system?
Well, we actually didn't decide. Given my focus as a Latin Americanist with a specialization on Mexico and Greater Mexico, as the Tejano scholar Americo Paredes coined, I was chosen to be the campus representative for UC Mexis and for the Committee on Latino Research, which I served from 1991 to 1997. I found out in my first meeting that the UC up in Oakland, at the Office of the President, had made available monies to establish a fund or to fund Chicano Research Centers. We didn't know about this here at UCSC. So with Pedro, when I came back, we had held a meeting of all those who were teaching and researching Chicano, Latino, and Latin American areas of study. We then organized a subcommittee, and a group of us went to speak to the administration. We were told that the funds had been dispersed through various departments at UCSC that engaged these topics. Well, we let them know that we wanted the funds to establish a Chicano Latino Research Center, since we were one of the few campuses in the UC system without one, pointing out that this intellectual space was woefully missing. They requested a proposal, we presented it, and we finally received the funding. We had an excellent group of faculty working in these areas, many recognized scholars in their disciplines. I'm not sure if the administration was aware of that.
Professor Castillo, for you, why did you want to be part of this collaboration with Professor Klahn as the co-founders, and what was your interpretation of the support from the university at the time?
There was a number of faculty here that focused their research and teaching efforts on Mexicano, Latin American issues. There were others like myself who focused on the United States and looked at race and ethnicity. But there was no vehicle for them to come together. So, as Norma pointed out, when we had this first meeting, there was a lot of enthusiasm for people to come together to possibly not form a research center, but do something so we could meet on a regular basis, we could exchange ideas, write proposals. So when Norma went to this meeting at the Office of the President and came back, pointing out that there was funds. This was very encouraging to many of us. So this is when we put together a small committee, went to the administration and asked them this is what we wanted to do. Or maybe we told them this is what we want them to do. I forgot exactly how it went. I don't think they were very happy about that because basically we're talking about $50,000 and it went to other departments to do whatever the administration wanted to do. And we wanted the money to do what we wanted to do. So I thought this was terrific to bring people together, and that's how we began.
I love that story because it's really about placing demands on the institution for representation at a time when the bodies were here, but we wanted a different kinds of representation through the research center. What does it feel like? It's 25 years, which is hard to believe, but it's 25 years anniversary. What does it feel like to you, Professor Klahn? We'll start with you. How does it feel like to be honored and recognized for the 25th anniversary of the CLRC?
Well, it's really hard to believe that it's been 25 years. I don't think I ever expected at all that work we did with the support of enthusiastic faculty, not only in Chicano, Latino, Latin American areas of study, but also faculty across campus who either served on our advisory board or attended our colloquia series. This opened up the fields, both, as I think Pedro was just saying, of ethnic studies and area studies in really, really productive and creative ways. It's also important to remember that we subtitled the CLRC Cross-Border Perspectives Linking the Americas. All this work by so many faculty, graduates, and undergraduates will now be archived is something I never thought would happen. It's a testimony to the continued commitment to research and dissemination in these areas of studies.
What about for you, Professor Castillo? What does it feel like 25 years?
Well, 25 years later, what is rewarding to me was that a number of us are trained very rigidly in graduate school. In other words, I was trained in history, trained in U.S. history, contemporary history, and specifically I was working and trying to establish Chicano Mexican American history. And what was rewarding is that a number of us came together not knowing about Mexico or Latin America. So the U.S. folks learned about that. The Latin Americans learned about the U.S. And it was that collaboration, that very transformative, that we really did comparative history, literature, culture, emphasis on the arts, on the humanities, on the social sciences. And that was very exciting, going to the colloquiums, editing papers, working together in books that were published, the editorial process, but kind of bridging one's discipline and expanding one's knowledge about other fields and other perspectives. I think that's what I really enjoyed, and that's what really makes me feel like we were really successful in what we did.
When people talk about the CLRC now, they frame it in those ways about bringing scholars who typically are not in conversation together. They talk about the ways we've influenced each other. And I think the linking of the Americas, it's an incredible contribution. It was very cutting edge. That's still cutting edge.
Yeah. I think it's good to point out again that all of our books, or most of our books, or some of our books, the U.S.-Mexico Fronteras, the Nuevas Fronteras,
del siglo XXI.
These scholars were both from the U.S. and from Mexico. Our Chicana Feminism's book also had scholars from Mexico and from the U.S. Those were, I think, very early on a model for books that followed.
You were listening to Professor Norma Klahn, Professor of Literature, and Professor Pedro Castillo, Professor of History from UC Santa Cruz. Professors Klahn and Castillo are the co-founders of the Chicano Latino Research Center, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And there are archives at the McHenry Library on the third floor in special collections that documents this incredible history about the founding of this important research center. Professor Castillo, can you share maybe some memories with us of your time very early on of the CLRC?
Well, I have one personal memory that I was talking to my wife about this past week after we went to the exhibit, which was that our initial office was in Merrill College, and it was in what was the Fellows Lounge, which wasn't used by the Fellows of Merrill College. So we went to the provost and asked if we could turn it into the office for the CLRC, and the provost said yes after he checked with some of the faculty. And we were having a meeting once, and I was babysitting my 3-year-old granddaughter who was playing around, and at that time there was a counter, but it had some faucets, and she was playing around with the water, so I had to move from our meeting. I think it was a steering committee meeting, trying to be very serious about the CLRC and taking care of my 3-year-old granddaughter who had climbed up to the counter and was playing with the water. And so there's a lot of fond memories. I mean, there's other memories that are much more serious than that, but that one just comes to mind just recently.
I love that story because I think, it's important to remember that we also come with family. We don't come as independent, detached scholars, that as Latinos we have a close connection to family and bringing them into our life.
My granddaughter went to the Smith College and she majored in Latin American studies. So there was some influence.
And Professor Klahn, for you, what do you think makes the CLRC distinct in comparison to other CLRC type centers in the UC system?
Well, being that Santa Cruz was one of the few campuses without a Chicano Studies Center or program, and this was post-1989, we were able to respond to the major changes happening in the world. I believe we brought a timely, comparative, cross-border, critical perspective to the study of issues facing California's Chicano, Latino, Latin American populations, in keeping with what we saw at the time as an increasing trend toward globalization, regional economic integration, and the changing demographics of not only California, but of the U.S. Through increasing migration patterns. Remember, it was the time of NAFTA, and back again today in an updated discussion. The 500 years commemorating, we might say, the invention of America. It was 1992, the Zapatista uprising of 1994, and a time when cross-border alliances among feminists, indigenous peoples, environmentalists were eagerly drafting novel research agendas. By 1997, we were cited by the reports of the Office of the President as one of the model research centers of the UC system for concentrating on Latino and Latin American topics within the context of changing historical realities. I want to add, they also commended us for including so many graduate students, all from different disciplines. That was a plus.
And quickly to add to that, not to brag, but...
You can brag.
I mean, at one time, there used to be research centers for Chicano studies, which was separate from research centers for Latin American studies. And what we did, we brought them together to look at Chicano, Latino, Mexicano, the Caribbean, Central America, Latin America. And it became a model for, we would get calls and we would get commentary at various professional meetings that what we were doing is looking at transformative, comparative border studies and comparative studies of peoples on both sides of the border. And I think that made it very unique and very exciting.
Very innovative. I mean, and clearly that resonates so much with the scholarship today in terms of shaping comparative research and the sort of thinking we do. We have to understand all of these issues as interconnected because there's so many things that draw them together and their connections. If you could dream a little bit with me, Professor Castillo, where do you like to see the CLRC in 10, 15, 20 years from now, and what would you like those interventions to be?
As the population of Spanish-learning people increases in the United States, and as we're seeing not only Mexican origin, but Guatemalans, Argentinians, Cubans, Nicaraguenses, people from all over the Americas coming to the United States, is becoming a very critical population. It's becoming much more important politically population, clearly economic importance in the United States. So as that Latino population continues to grow, as Latin America is becoming, to some, very important, to others, like the current administration, not so important. But nevertheless, I think there's the need to dream what it would be like in the future. I would hope that some of the projects and some of the directions that were started 25 years ago could continue. That collaboration, the comparative, looking at different groups. There's a new book that's coming out soon by one of our former colleague, Paul Ortiz, who's a historian who used to be in the community studies program, and he's doing a comparative history of Chicano, Latino, and African American history. And I think that's going to be dynamic. It's something that's happening, and I would like to hopefully see those efforts that we started 25 years ago continue, be modified with the interests of the faculty here at Santa Cruz.
Professor Klahn, the research being supported through the CLRC really conveys an urgency right now on some of the most pressing issues facing our culture, our society, our world, right? Citizenship, immigrant rights, migration, mobility, refugees, and so forth. How do you understand the CLRC as being relevant in understanding so many of these social issues today?
We were responding to, I think I mentioned before, the fall of the Berlin Wall, globalizing forces, technological shifts that I see now marked a watershed moment, a before and an after. It's clearer now to me that, and to us, I think that the CLRC's critical work marked a transitional moment. I think we could start seeing the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. One of our books had that specifically as a title. The issues we were critically engaged with have become increasingly relevant and will, I believe, continue to be so in the near and maybe even possibly distant future, as Pedro was pointing out, especially given rising exclusionary nationalistic tendencies. Some of our research, I want to think, will continue to be valid in the future, given the increasingly heterogeneous populations in the U.S. Among others, I'd say U.S.-Mexico and Latin American relations, given the Latinx diaspora in this country, and the ways these communities continue to be impacted by immigration, policies that relate to health, labor conditions, education, human rights, and citizenship. I also think it's crucial to continue paying critical attention to feminism, indigeneity, and environmental issues, which were important when we established the CLRC, along with, and I would add, and I think just Pedro just mentioned that, interethnic relations, which may become even more relevant this century.
Absolutely. And what about you, Professor Castillo, in terms of sort of the urgency of now? Where do we want to think about CLRC and its relevance?
Some of the topics that you mentioned, like citizenship, immigrant rights, migration, mobility, refugees, culture, the arts, are becoming issues all over the world. I mean, we're seeing immigration issues becoming very significant the last 10 years in Europe, for example. We're seeing immigrants coming from Africa to the Middle East to Europe, Latin Americans coming to the United States. So this whole, that began looking at Chicano, Latino, Latin American issues at UC Santa Cruz. We need to look at globalization and the impact of these issues in France, in Russia, in Japan. And what we've had here in the past with the CLRC is that many scholars from all over the world have come to the CLRC, in particular from the Spanish-speaking countries, but we've had scholars from all over the world come here to talk with our faculty, as well as faculty from here visiting the border in Tijuana, going to Mexico City for a conference, going to Bolivia to present some of the research that we've had. But we've also had many of our faculty members going to Europe, going to Africa to look at what is being done on these topics. So I think this is really the beginning of a global perspective on some of these issues.
So it's now linking the Americas to the world, really,
yes,
in many important ways. You're listening to Professor Norma Klahn, Professor of Literature, and Professor Pedro Castillo, Professor of History from UC Santa Cruz. Professors Klahn and Castillo are the co-founders of the Chicano Latino Research Center, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, its silver anniversary. In honor of that anniversary, there are now these incredible CLRC archive at the McHenry Library on the 3rd floor. Big shout out to the students, undergrad and graduate students who helped with the CLRC archive. So if you are listening and thinking about starting your own research center, take a look at this archive. We just have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to get any kind of final comments or reflections you have about the significance of the CLRC, its 25th anniversary, or any other final comments you'd like to share. Professor Klahn, let's start with you.
I just want to applaud the present CLRC faculty, graduates and undergraduates, the LALS faculty, graduates and undergraduates, and the UCSC librarians that have contributed to the celebration of the 25 years of the CLRC, and to all their efforts at organizing an enormous amount of materials that are now on display at the library and that will be archived. Books, working papers, tapes, videos, newsletters, posters, photos. It's been a labor of love and commitment, which should serve us as an inspiration to all of us as we continue to build our scholarly community and hopefully move forward.
I just quickly wanted to add that what is gratifying is that a number of the graduate students who worked as graduate research assistants at the CLRC, or we supported their research with a summer research grant, are now faculty members throughout the United States. Sergio Mora is a very important person, professor at UC Davis who looks at Mexican film. Amelie Blakeoil is at UCLA in the Chicano Studies Department who looks at women and looks at the indigenous population. A number of people throughout California and the United States, and they received their training, they were involved, they worked for us, they did very excellent work, their dissertations were published into books. So I think the graduate component really was excellent and got faculty to work as mentors for these graduate students.
I'll add Ana Patricia Rodriguez, who's now a major figure in Central American literature.
There are many, many, many people who came through the CLRC, and I think it's a testament to both of you for having the vision to establish the CLRC and an incredible recognition of the labor. And I would have to sort of acknowledge also the hours of labor that that are involved in the creation of anything, often unrecognized, often undervalued. And I hope, if anything, that we've reached the 25th year makes that labor and that love worth it, because I think we all value the CLRC so much and what it does for us. So thank you so much for all of your work. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to Voces Criticas. You can find us on the web at criticalvoices.sites.ucsc.edu. You can email us at kzsc.voices@gmail.com. And if you want to learn more about the CLRC, you should check out their website, which is clrc.ucsc.edu.